Being born again gives purpose to pursue the presence of God and the works of God, and to transform our lives, our families, and our communities. Spontaneous healing and recovery is a fascinating subject. Mass recovery is an extraordinary thing. One example of mass recovery happened during the French Revolution. When the patients at the Salpêtrière heard of the revolution happening outside of the walls of the hospital, they spontaneously recovered and joined in. There was a second revolution in France at the Salpêtrière. This revolution was in the late 1800s. The revolution was the relationship between patient and doctor, a therapeutic relationship that had not so much existed before. A young Freud, witnessed this relationship between insane patients and Dr. Pinel, who took off the restraints of his patients. There's a famous painting depicting that. Both stories are incredibly interesting in their own right, but also because they demonstrate two ways that healing and recovery come about: through the therapeutic relationship, but also through revolution. History is fundamentally a cycle of total depravity followed by self-awareness and redemption. In the West, we place increasing emphasis on the sovereign individual and solve problems to uplift the individual in line with our belief in sovereignty. The 19th and 20th centuries were characterized by incredible advances which rapidly, when placed on the backdrop of history, improved living conditions around the world. This time was also characterized by a sickness of self-awareness. It seemed to, in Western culture, have reached a peak. I think frequently about the mundane but cataclysmic events that led to the First World War, the bungled assassination of dubious royals Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie, which led to the alliance and the Entente, setting the scene for World War. That event was the antecedent to common alliances and common enemies. We need purpose. A common enemy gives purpose, regardless of the reason. Purpose assuages our feelings of worthlessness, shame, guilt, anxiety, sadness, and fear. Purpose affords us feelings of value, pride, gratitude, expansiveness, joy, and transcendence. In this week's reading, the Greek named Nicodemus approached Jesus at night to converse with him. Before we get into that, it's very interesting that Nicodemus doesn't ask a question, but rather makes a statement saying, "We know that you are good and that you do the works of God." Jesus then responds that you can only perceive God's presence if you're born again. So the conversation ensues about new birth. And it's tempting to join the revolutions happening around us because of the promise of recovery, of renewal, to join that cycle of achieving redemption from depravity on our own terms, to join in the theology, philosophy, politics, science. And these are incredibly valuable in their own right. Over and over again, studies demonstrate that faith and religion result in greater well-being, quality of relationships, transcendence, meaning, generosity. Jesus said to Nicodemus that being born of the Spirit is the requisite for entering the kingdom of God. The coming of the kingdom of God has always transformed the nature of our reality. And it's a wonderful encouragement to know that we live in the continuing fulfillment of Habakkuk and Joel's prophecies. His Spirit is being poured out on all people. Father, send your Spirit on us.